Hey everyone, welcome to A Mess Nonetheless. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Melissa, and we are sisters. Hi!
Welcome back, specifically to you, Melissa. You haven't been on here since last year.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, obviously that wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it's been a while.
Well, January was like 100 weeks, so
It was.
so long. We did, I know. So anyways, I'm glad to be back here with you. It's always fun to obviously, like I did it with Mom, but I just prefer when we have guests and you're on it. So I'm really happy to be here with you. Yes. Also, Melissa's sick. So she's not feeling great. So she might have a lot of muting times.
To cough.
Muting times.
Just coughing. Coughing fits. Yeah. Nobody wants to hear that in the microphone.
Well, it sucks. You've had influenza. It really sucks.
That's why I also look really good today. I was like, I think you look anything for myself.
I think you look adorable. So
thank you.
I haven't worn a hat in a long time, and I should, because I look cuter sometimes than I do when I fix my hair. I should put a hat on. I just came from church, and I should look good, but I feel like you look way better.
Oh, that's funny.
Anyways. All right. So today we're going to talk about something that very much applies to parenting. However, don't turn us off right now if you're like, I'm done. I don't parent kids anymore, or I don't have little kids. Because one, Melissa and I have the experience of also parenting adult children, right? Melissa's like really moving in the direction of having all adult children. Her youngest is 15. And I, of course, have young children and will for a long time because E11 is 7. But I have been parenting adult children for a long 12 years. So we think what we are going to say applies to young children, middle school children, high school children, adult children. I honestly think it applies to all relationships. I think that anything you listen to today, we can all take and apply to all relationships, marriages, friendships, coworkers, bosses, really ministry, anything. And so I hope that you will hear us out and not shut us off if you're like, I'm not parenting young children, because I do think everyone can get something from this.
Yes. So I will be honest, I don't remember what we're talking about today. Has anyone ever heard me say that? But when Rachel brought it to my attention, like 2 months ago, I agreed with her. I said, this definitely, I am bouncing. If you're on YouTube, sorry, I don't know. I'm at the same table I always sit at, and it's bouncing my computer. Anyways, I remember when she told me, thinking, yes, this can absolutely apply to all relationships. So I'm excited to remember.
She's not there yet, but she's excited to get there. Exactly. Oh my gosh. So we have 5 points we're going to talk through, and this might end up being 2 episodes because we might have too much to talk through. So let's see how far we get. So the first one, what did you say?
Let's go.
Let's go. So the first one is, and this is in specifically parenting. This is like one of the hugest things that we can apply to our parenting. I also think this is one of the hugest things we can apply to our marriage and our friendships. I think it matters more in parenting than it does in other relationships, but I think it matters just in our character, like, as if you will, like how we represent ourselves to people. And that is to stay consistent, right? So in parenting, of course, this is super, super important.
So important.
I also think when it comes to ministry or my marriage, like being consistent does matter. So I'm not suggesting that this doesn't apply in other areas, but this is such a specific to parenting one that this is so huge. And we cannot stress the importance enough of this one. And this is why we're starting with it. Because I think if we struggle with consistency specifically in our parenting or really in any relationship, if we're not showing up and being reliable on what we do and what we say we're going to do, everything else kind of falters. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I'm like just thinking through scenarios in my head, and 100%. If you, like, yes, this is so big in parenting, but I'm thinking about even friendships, my husband, whatever. If they can't rely on me to follow through with what I say or how I'm going to react to things, it makes you unapproachable. It makes you unsafe. It makes you less likely to want or to have a good relationship. Are my pause for a second? Are my lights blinking? I mean, they are, but are you seeing it?
No, I can't see it. Okay. No, I can't see it. So specifically in parenting, I think in relationships too, in all relationships, what we do teaches people how to be in a relationship with us. Mm-hmm. And what we don't do teaches people how to be in a relationship with us. So if we are reliable, it teaches people that we are safe, right? Mm-hmm. If we are consistent and reliable and we follow through. If we are inconsistent and unpredictable, it does teach people we're unsafe. We are inconsistent. You have to walk on eggshells around me because you can't ever guarantee how I'm going to react based on history, because history is all over the place. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if you think about, have you ever been in a relationship with someone who was unpredictable and just didn't follow through? Like, I think we probably all have. Yeah. And so like, picture that relationship, picture that person. And I think we could all probably say, yeah, it's really difficult to have a genuinely safe or secure relationship with that kind of person, even if it's a long-standing relationship, even if it's always been there. Like, there's always this factor of, I don't quite feel safe in this relationship.
Yeah, well, if you're like have to really think through and process through having any kind of confrontation or any kind of harder conversation with them because you just aren't sure how they're going to respond, you're less likely to pursue those kind of conversations. But then that leads to lack of healing or lack of growth in the relationship.
A resolution.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, if you really can't, it's just not even worth it sometimes. But then what kind of relationship is that? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely had relationships where it does feel like it's not worth even telling this person how I feel because it never really goes anywhere. It's not a safe space. It's not genuinely like a genuinely comfortable and safe space. I love this person. I'm going to be in a relationship with them forever, maybe because they're family or whatever. But it's like, you never really get to the nitty gritty because they're inconsistent in their responses. And so that might look like half the time we're walking on eggshells around a person because we never know how they're going to respond. And then the other half, we think, oh, everything's fine. And then suddenly you're in a minefield that you didn't even see coming. And that's what happens when we're really inconsistent people is we put that on the people that we love. And that's a really terrible feeling. And so that's why I think this is so important in all of our relationships, because I think an inconsistency in our relationship is not a relationship covered in love.
Right. Well, it's because when we're inconsistent, we're usually responding out of our feelings, out of our emotions, and we're not. So those can fluctuate from day to day, from situation to situation, and what is ultimately, I think we're being selfish when we just react because we don't take the time to pause and process through how to respond in a way that's loving. And even if there's something to be mad about, you can be mad without being hurtful. And and so yes, I don't think that it's how did you say it? Covered in love? Not at all.
It's not a relationship covered in love. It doesn't really matter how much you love a person. If we are super inconsistent and unreliable, we are not covering our relationship in love. It's really not about, oh, I love that person. It's just how we're showing the relationship love. I have this person in my life who is working really hard on not responding out of feelings. This person is doing the work to cover all of his relationships in love. And so what happens is he has a couple people, and I'm one of them, that he will text and be like, so we're going to fly off the handle. There's a text I really want to come back with, and I really want to be emotional, and I'm probably going to be hurtful in the way that I respond. And so instead of responding to that person, he brings it to me or these other two people and says, this is how I'm feeling. And then we talk him off the ledge. And then
Mom would say, walk him off the ledge.
Yep, I walk him right off the ledge. and we talk him off the ledge. And then he's like, okay, I feel better. He still has to respond to whatever it is he needs to respond to, but he's learning to not trust his feelings right away. And I had to do that for years. I was like, I can't trust myself because I'm responding out of my emotions. And so sadly, I was being consistently hurtful. But in learning to be a steady, consistent person, I had to train myself. You cannot respond out of your feelings because it hurts everyone. And if I do respond out of my feelings, I have to apologize because it's still going to happen sometimes, but it's my job to own up to it and say, nope, that wasn't fair to you. And 1 Corinthians 14:33 says that God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. An inconsistency says to someone, I am not safe. You can never assume how I'm going to respond. And it creates chaos and confusion in our relationships. And it says God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. So if we want to love people like God does, or parent our children like God does, like God loves them and parents us, we can't allow chaos and confusion to rule our homes and our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's in God's character to be fair and just. He says what he means and he means what he says. And the Old Testament is proof of that, time and time again, him saying, don't do this. This isn't going to go well for you. They did it. It doesn't go well for them. And then he comes back and is like, there's going to be another chance, but don't do this. And then they did it. And he shows over and over and over in the Old Testament. He means what he says and he says what he means. And I think that is exactly what consistency is. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
Yeah.
We don't expect people to read between the lines. We don't expect people to make assumptions. And I have become someone who I live my life that way, to the point where people will say, well, I was thinking, you know, what you said, I was thinking maybe you meant this, but then I thought, no, Rachel just says what she means and means what she says. To the point where they can, like, people can rely on that in my life 90% of the time. I mean, of course I still make mistakes, but I've had several times where someone was like, oh, I was thinking maybe you meant this, but then I thought that's probably not what she means, because that's not what she said. And that has been like such a joy to me, to have people come to me and like walk me through that process and realize that I've consistently been someone who says what I mean and mean what I say. So then they can rely on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even my adult children have said those kinds of things. And it's huge. I'm like, this is such growth for me, because that is very much not who I used to be. But I think it's something we should all strive to work on in our own lives.
Right. Well, and when you do regularly say what you mean and mean what you say, and people can trust that, then if someone, I'm trying to think of how to word this, if someone attacks you in a way that is like they're putting something on you that you're like, but I never said that. I've never thought that. That's not even my character, which I've proven. Not that it just makes everything okay, but it helps for me when I get like attacked by something that I'm like, but that's not who I am. And I know that's not even what I was thinking or feeling. It helps me not have to wrestle so much with, did I get it wrong? And not that I can't take blame for things when I get it wrong. That's not what I'm saying.
You definitely do.
Yes, but it's one of those situations where when you are regularly consistent, you can feel confident in yourself. Also, does that make sense? What I'm saying?
You are a very consistent person in your character. I'm saying that to you, Melissa. And so when there have been times that people have come and said things that don't add up and aren't accurate, the first thing you want to feel is like, oh no, I made this huge mistake, whatever. But then as you wrestle through it, you're like, wait, that's not even consistent with my character. And this person knows my character. I've shown it to them over and over and over. So maybe the issue is in their head. Now, to be clear, Melissa always is like, I want to know where I've gone wrong. I want to know how I can fix it. That is 100% who she is. But she can settle in, especially if it's an unresolved thing, which sometimes that happens. You can settle comfortably in, I know who I am, because because you are consistent in your character.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Yeah, it's true. So specifically in parenting, it is really important that when we say something to our kids, like let's say I tell Brighton I can get him to that party on Saturday. Now he has his license, but let's just pretend he doesn't. And all of a sudden it conflicts with something I want to do. Well, I still want to do what I want to do, but I did tell him I would get him there. And so it is important to me to be a parent or a person of honor and integrity that I figure out a way to get him there and not just, oh, I just didn't follow through. Sorry, bud, something else came up. No, obviously there are times when like acts of God and things, fevers and things like that arise. And then I'm horribly sorry. But if I tell my kids I'm going to do something, I do it. And I'm very cautious to say 100% I can do that. There's a lot of, we'll see. Let's look at that later. I'm going to have to talk to dad. I'm going to look at the calendar. I'm sure they wish I would just make decisions right then and now, but I won't make the decision without all the information because I don't want to ever go back on my word. And I want them
something that you can't actually commit to.
Well, that exactly. Yes. But it's very important to me that I don't break promises to my kids. So I don't make very many promises. And if I say I'm going to do something, I want to do it because I want them to trust if my mom said she'll be there for me, she's going to be there for me. And even in just the day-to-day things, that applies to how our families can trust us in the big things.
Well, it's true. So I can't remember if I shared this with you guys on here, but this last summer, Bill and I had plans to take our kids to Montana for a family vacation. It was something that we have I mean, we have not really gone on much of a family vacation ever. So we were so excited. And then Bill lost his job and we could not make it happen. And I was devastated. But part of my devastation was I was like, I don't ever want my kids to think that that we don't take this seriously when we say we're going to do something big. But of course, because of our history with them, they were so loving and kind. And they're like, we know that we know that you want to go. You're not just changing your mind.
You had this fear and your kids were like, we never even would have thought that because we know who you are.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, but if we had made a, habit of letting them down on all the small things, they would have had a hard time having grace for us, even though the circumstances were so understandable. It would have been hard for them. It would have been easy to then be like, well, there we go again. Just mom and dad not doing what they say, and
it's true.
The small daily things absolutely pave the way for the bigger things.
Well, God says when we can be trusted in little, we can be trusted in a lot. And so it's like, it starts with the little things. And, another thing is like, I know Melissa is so good at this and I've learned from her a ton is give your kids, don't give your kids no-win scenarios, like give them options, even if one is to make a bad choice. And in our family, we call that choose the cookie tuck. There's this story of Melissa's son when he was like 3 and he just threw these outrageous tantrums. I mean, just 45 minutes. She would just put him in his room and be like, when you're ready, we can talk about it. But you couldn't calm him down. So she just kind of let him do his thing in there. And one time, if I remember the story correctly, everyone was going to get a cookie, but Tucker was having a bad attitude. And so the options were, you guys can have good attitudes and get a cookie, or you can have your bad attitude and not get a cookie. And the 5-year-old turns to him and says, choose the cookie, Tuck. Choose the cookies.
And he didn't choose the cookie.
He did not choose the cookie. So he went and had his bad attitude and everyone happily ate their cookie and there was no cookie for Tuck. Because she said there was going to be no cookie, then there was no cookie. She followed through on that. And so in our family, we give our kids, you can be like, you just got this pack of gum and you don't want to share. You get the choice to be selfish. But please understand the consequences that when your sibling gets some gum and they love to share, and they might not share with you, even though they're going to share with everyone else. Like there is going to be a natural consequence. But we want to teach our kids, you do get to make the poor choice. But there's going to be a consequence. But also there's always a good choice to be made here too. And, and I just think, Ephesians 6:4 says, fathers, don't exasperate your children with no-win scenarios. Take them by the hand and lead them to the way of the master. I think the way that we show our kids God and his love and faithfulness is by being that way to our kids, being consistent, say what you mean what you say, follow through, and give our kids choices that help them choose best instead of just everything is, obviously everything can't be authoritarian. And if we are parenting that way, we're going to push our kids away real fast.
Yeah. And part of the consistency isn't even just following through with the good things. It's also following through with the hard things. Like,
absolutely.
That is so very important. If we become, kind of like jokes to our kids when we say we're going to do something, like if you do that, you're going to have this consequence. And then we don't ever follow through with that consequence. They don't take us seriously. And so, I remember when our kids were younger, there would be a few times where my husband would react big and say something big. And I was like, I'm going to throw your bike away. I'm like, are you really going to throw their bike away? He's like, well, no, probably not. I'm like, you can't say that.
Say it.
And he would be like, you're right. I shouldn't have said it. I'm not going to throw your bike away, but I am going to take it away for a while. I'm like, well, that's understandable.
Yes, that is understandable. Well, I heard this quote that said, no amount of intensity can make up for a lack of consistency. No amount of intensity can make up for lack of consistency. Now, this was talking about working out in the gym, which it totally applies. But I was like, no, this applies to everything. This applies to parenting. So what happens is, like when you said we become jokes to our kids start to write us off. If we're not consistent on following through on what we say, good and bad, they start being like, well, that's just mom. Oh, dad's just telling me he's going to burn the house down, throw my bike away. And they don't believe us. Why would they if we don't follow through? Well, then what happens is we're really frustrated. And so we raise our intensity and then we're screaming our heads off and because no one's listening. Well, why is no one listening? Because we haven't been consistent. We haven't been following through on what we said. So now no one's listening. Don't get me wrong. You can be super consistent. Kids still won't listen.
Right.
But it's definitely worse when we're not consistent. And so we raise our level of intensity thinking this is going to do the trick and it doesn't. And if 2 out of 10 times we're actually consistent. That's really unfair to our kids because now you're like, well, now I'm taking your phone away for a month. But every other time we said a consequence, we didn't follow through. It's really not fair that because we've had it with really the consequences of our own lack of consistency, we raise our level of intensity. And now they're getting this massive consequence when we didn't follow through on all the ones leading up to this. Yeah. And it's unfair. And it's unfair to ourselves. It's unfair to our spouse. It's unfair to our homes. It's unfair to our children. And yeah, I think if we're not consistent, we can't expect to just come in guns a-blazing with intensity and make up for what we have done poorly in consistency.
Agreed.
Yeah. I have a story I have to share about consistency. So Eland is 7, but then my next one up is in middle school. So I have 6th grade and up, and then a 1st grader. And so Eland, there's just some things that it's like, he's still learning that the other kids know good and well. And so one time I threatened something that I absolutely was going to follow through on, and it was going to be a big, big, painful consequence. And Eland, you can tell he's kind of ruminating in his brain, like, is she really going to do that? And my daughter, Ada, who's super dry, looks at him and goes, you should know by now, Eland, Mom always follows through on what she says she's going to do. He kind of looked at her and she's like, and then it's like, that's the choose the cookie talk moment. Like, choose the cookie talk, like, come on. And he was kind of like, he hadn't learned it quite yet. Like, he's only 7. So he's like, I just haven't really he hasn't thought those things through. But she's like, oh, Mom's going to follow through. So she says she's going to cancel your birthday party because you've been so bad for 2 weeks straight. She will cancel your birthday party. And I wouldn't threaten that if we hadn't had that bad of a couple weeks where every little thing was like such a, such a pain and we weren't making any progress. And he did get to have his birthday party because the wisdom of his sister stepped in. Oh my gosh. Anyways. Okay. So something I wrote in a book, it's a marriage and parenting Bible study. It's on Amazon. It's called For Your Glory. And something I was rereading through it because I thought, there might be some things in there that I could use in this. And something I read that I wrote 7 years ago, which is kind of ironic because 7 years ago, actually, it might have been 8. I didn't have Eland when I wrote it. And he's definitely been the one we've struggled to be the most consistent with. I definitely blame my husband for that. And he would probably agree with that. But as a result, we have been the least consistent with him. The other ones, they were all so close together. I just had to keep my ducks in a row. And then he comes along 4 or 5 years later, and it's like, it's just sometimes easier to forget about all the investment that you put in the other ones with the one or the youngest or whatever. I remember when you had that with Tad, you were like, oh, shoot, I still have to teach him some of these things. Yeah. And so this is what I wrote. Consistency is something we have attempted to do right in our family at all costs because it is that important. At different points, each of my children have come to me to remind me of a consequence they deserved when I had forgotten about it. This is so encouraging to me that consistency is becoming so ingrained in them that it feels wrong when they're not held accountable. Our consistency teaches our kids to be consistent. Our holding them accountable teaches them to desire to be held accountable. Our inconsistency teaches them to be inconsistent. There really is no way around it. Yeah. And I mean, I know your kids did the same thing. Like, you forgot about me when like we said, go, we're going to give you a consequence because they're like, I need that consequence. Nothing will feel right if I just get away with it. And that only comes from being super consistent because then they learn how important it is.
I mean, we should clarify. It's not that our kids are like, oh, good, I get a consequence.
No.
They just can feel that something isn't finalized because we consistently follow through with what we say. Now, if we go to our children and say, this is something I remember doing quite often, like, I'm going to show you grace and I am not going to follow through with this consequence because of whatever reason, we talk it through. Obviously, they're super excited about that.
Exactly. No one was ever like, I want a consequence. They were just like, but nothing's resolved because they didn't get a consequence. And the older they get, the less they desire to hold us accountable in that way.
No, they don't care
when they're little
anymore.
No,
they were so much better when they were younger.
So our next point we're going to talk about is apologize constantly. And this is all relationships across the board. Yes. And I think it flows pretty seamlessly from the first one because I'm going to go ahead and guess that almost all of us struggle with inconsistency in some way in our life and in our relationships. And so that means there's a lot of opportunities to apologize. Because in relationships, when we get it wrong, we should absolutely be apologizing every single time. Yeah. And I wish I could say I didn't have to apologize to my kids and my husband, but I do, like literally all the time, because I'm always getting something wrong. But I think apologizing is one of the most underrated things in relationships. Would you agree?
It smooths everything out. So it's like amazing. I mean, think about everyone listening. Just think for a second of a time that you were really struggling with somebody because they hurt you, they did something, and then on their own, they came and apologized to you, and how just like that, it was like, oh, okay, we're better now. Now, I'm not saying an apology smooths over everything. Obviously,
doesn't fix everything, but
and the severity of what they're apologizing for. But just in general, not terrible things, but like yeah, and underrated for sure. Yeah,
it softens hearts and starts to break down walls. I mean, I think 99% of the time, that's just the beginning of moving forward in any sort of relationship conflict. And the thing is like, I don't want to be part of unresolved hurt in people's lives. I want to be part of the healing. And so what that looks like is when I know I'm wrong, or asking, did I do something wrong here? Right? Like asking the question, being and wanting to own up to it. Like, I don't want there to be any confusion about when I know I've been wrong. If I am yelling at my kid, and I'm like, man, I can give you any excuse under the sun for how they led me to that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't right. I should have had more control, and they are just a kid. And so I need to own up for that, because I want them to know, hey, that's not okay. And I shouldn't be doing that. And I just don't want there to be any confusion about who's at fault here. And I don't want to put my own stuff on them, because they do plenty of things wrong that we do have to correct them for. But my own lack of self-control, for example, is not really their fault. Right. Even if they're absolutely driving us up a wall.
Yeah.
Still responsible for myself. Well, and years ago, I remember thinking I really wanted to raise kids who knew how to have like healthy conflict resolution, and being like, okay, well, how do I do that? And I really felt like God was showing me, you have to lead the way. You teach them by example. And so when you hurt them, now there's a conflict, and in order to get resolution, you have to apologize. And if we're not apologizing, we're missing the crucial step, again, in any relationship, but especially with our kids. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, why don't we apologize? Like, what is, I mean, I would say pride is at the root of it. Like, we're just maybe being, I'm sorry, I'm having such a hard time finding my words. What is the word when you're just unaware? Like, you're just
oblivious.
Oblivious. Thank you. That is literally the word I'm looking for. So like, sometimes we could just be so oblivious to how we treat people or how we are. But I think that most of the time, if we really are honest with ourselves and we know we need to apologize and we don't, it's a pride thing. And
I agree.
Which, of course, we've talked about pride many times over the seasons, is that destroys relationships too. And so it just,
it's very biblical that pride is terrible.
Terrible.
So bad. No, I totally agree with you. It is definitely pride that keeps us from apologizing. If we don't know we've hurt someone, I don't necessarily think that is pride, but then we're told and we can't bring ourselves to apologize, that's pride. Yeah. And so we want to be people who are consistently safe to come to and say, you hurt me. You may be oblivious, but you did. And we want to be someone who's consistently safe to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I did not mean to do that. And in the Bible, it says if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so when we apologize to someone, we are confessing to the other person what we've done. I am so sorry I did that. That is our confession. I want forgiveness. And God is so faithful to allow forgiveness and cleansing of our unrighteousness. And apologizing and confessing is so freeing, both in our relationships. Yeah, emotionally, spiritually, like on so many levels, it's so freeing. We just have to put our pride aside and get there.
It is. It's so, I mean, yeah. I just think about how we can feel we can get trapped in feeling like
they don't deserve an apology, or maybe they hurt me too, or I just, it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, there's all these reasons that we can go through our head, but the minute we say we're sorry, it affects us as much as anybody. Like it really is freeing.
No, I totally agree. And we talked about how it's rooted in pride when we're not willing to, but one of the verses the Bible says on pride, which there's a lot, is pride goes before destruction. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Nothing good flows from pride. Nothing. But it's like endless blessings that come from humility. And I used to be a super prideful person who didn't want to apologize. And I remember just feeling like it was like this hurdle or this mountain that like I just couldn't get myself over. But when I just started asking God, I just want to be a person who's humble. And I started seeking that. God gave me opportunities to be tested. But eventually I finally felt like I got over that mountain or that hurdle. It was like when I was on the other side, I was like, this is the land of the living over here. Like this is where freedom is, not living all bound up to my own pride.
Yeah. Yeah. Bound up. That's exactly it.
Yep. And it's going to inevitably help all of our relationships when we start putting our pride aside. Nothing good comes from bringing it in.
No.
So, okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap this one up. I'm struggling with my words too. I have the words. I just can't get them out. We're going to wrap this one up and we'll come back and finish the rest the next episode.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
You might feel that your life is a mess, but don't feel bad. Ours is too, but we own a microphone and we have no shame. That's why we'll talk about how our life is a mess nonetheless. That's the name of our podcast.